Cat Days by Griffin Rose on AO3. Episode 31. Chapter 5. Tests aren't just grades. Recovery Girl used her quirk, and the sudden energy drained took all of Izuku's anger with it. He and Bakugo parted ways for the day without another word, and Izuku went home, more or less, like a zombie. He didn't even make it to his room before passing out on the couch, accidentally crushing an unsuspecting Hitoshi who had already been sprawled on the cushions. What the hell? Hitoshi hissed. Izuku slushed him and buried his face in Hitoshi's side, and fell asleep. He woke up a few hours later in the same position, Hitoshi playing a game on his phone over Izuku's head, and he noticed when Izuku finally woke up. It took 3 seconds for Izuku to realize what he'd done. He threw himself off of Hitoshi and crashed to the floor, missing the coffee table by centimeters. Hitoshi was quick to jump up too. Thank God. You had no idea how badly I needed to use the restroom. He rushed out of sight, and the bathroom door slammed close. Izuku buried his crimson face in his hands, and he stayed there until Hitoshi came back, standing beside the couch and stretching. Sorry, I was really tired. Hitoshi snorted. Yeah, I got that. Shoulda said you were healed by Recovery Girl, so makes sense. Izuku nodded. Thanks for letting me sleep. Hitoshi shrugged and sank down onto the couch again, curling up in the corner. I probably could have moved if I wanted. You were out. Just felt wrong. Like a cat. It was not the first time someone had said that to Izuku. He had a habit of falling asleep on friends and families, and they always said the same thing. Just because he turned into a cat did not mean that they had to treat him like one when his feline tendencies popped up. He scrubbed his hands over his face. Where's Dad and Sashi? Sleeping in their rooms. Hitoshi said, Dad left his credit card out, so you want takeout? Nodding, the two picked up what they wanted, and some stuff for the adults, and then Izuku called to place the order. Hitoshi stated, in no uncertain term, that he would not call. It was not like Izuku loved doing it either, but it was far from the hardest thing he's done all day. By the time their pad thai arrived, Shouta and Hisashi had stumbled their way to the kitchen. Shouta tried to make coffee, but since it was 7 at night, everyone else ganged up on him and made him drink tea. So, other than exhausting, how did the exams go? Hitoshi asked. He was the only one who hadn't been there all day, and it was clearly he felt left out. Hisashi shrugged. Awful. Shouta, your students are devils. Shouta snorted. No, they're smart. Sashi pointed his chopstick at him. Devils. What did they do? Hitoshi cautiously asked. Sashi panishedly described procreating the exam for Cody and Jiro, detailing the truly terrible experience of being covered in bugs. Really? While we're eating? Shouta asked, frowning down on his noodles. They're your students. You have no one to blame but yourself. I'm proud of every one of them. Did everyone pass? Hitoshi asked. No, a few failed. They'll have extra lessons during summer camp to make up for it. Hitoshi nodded, stirring his noodles around. The adoption had only just been finalized, so it was somewhat bittersweet to be leaving for camp so soon, but he'd finally settled in. Izuku, how did your exam go? I didn't get a chance to see it. Sashi said. We passed, Izuku stated, stabbing the chopsticks into his noodles. No thanks to Bakugo. If it had been up to him, he would have been knocked out by All Might in 5 minutes. He picked up, threatening to jam a hole in the carton. The whole point of pairing us together was to focus on teamwork, and he decided to hit me across as soon as the exam started, just because I wanted to talk strategy. Like, that's some dumb idea or whatever. Shouta and Hisashi straightened. Bakugo did what? Shouta demanded. Izuku pointed to his cheek. Backhanded me, and told me to stay out of his way. We barely managed to get off a plan together at the end. Shouta groaned and put his head in his hands. That stubborn child. I'm sorry, Izuku. I thought he'd be more willing to cooperate for something as important as this. Why the hell didn't he? Hitoshi asked. It doesn't make sense to sabotage his own exam. Our relationship is complicated, Izuku said. He really didn't know the best word to describe it. There's still no excuse to take it out on you in the middle of an exam, Shouta said. He sounds like an asshole. What's complicated about that? Hitoshi asked. Izuku couldn't meet anyone's eyes, and chose to stare at his noodles instead. The problem was, even as kids, Bakugo had been a bit of an asshole, even if Izuku hadn't realized it at the time. That was why Izuku had such a hard time being around him now. 7 years later, and Bakugo was the same kid who pushed him over and set off explosions in his face. But it had also been 7 years ago, and the Bakugo family had mourned him while he disappeared on them. Bakugo was allowed to be upset at him for that. Hitoshi nodded and slurped a mouthful of noodles. Alright, I know the first kid I'm beating up when I transfer. Should be easy enough to brainwash him and make him explode himself out of the ring. The unexpected image made Izuku snort. Shouta smirked. Losing to you will be exactly what Bakugo's ego needs. Can I sell tickets? Izuku asked. I think half the school would pay to see Hitoshi hand Bakugo his own ass. Shouta and Hisashi laughed, and said no out of obligation, but they didn't sound very determined to stop him if he'd set something up secretly. His mood was drastically improved for the rest of the night, and Hitoshi kept throwing out more and more ridiculous ideas to combat Bakugo to perform. Making him sing and dance a girly pop song was Izuku's personal favorite. Shouta would have reviewed every exam no matter what, but after hearing Izuku talk about his, he ended up staying up half the night to start looking them over. He took notes on each student's performance, planning the best way for them to train their quirks in the upcoming camp. When it came to Bakugo and Izuku's test, he had to watch it 3 times, getting angrier and angrier each time. In the end, he had asked Vlad for a second opinion, so he could make sure he wasn't being partial to his son. He wanted to fail Bakugo automatically for punching his partner, but a lot of the motivation came from Shouta, the father, and he knew that. He needed the hero's persona to judge the exam, but with Izuku involved, he had a hard time separating the two. Since Vlad was a normal person with normal sleeping habits, it took him until right before homeroom started to get back to him. It made him conflict in his decision as he strode into the room. He revealed the obvious failures first, the ones who didn't complete either objective in their exams. Then he revealed that Sero also failed, since he was taken out right away and only passed thanks to his partner. In the real world, that meant he'd be dead, and Shouta didn't like passing actions that would get his students killed. Bakugo, you will also be joining them in remedial classes. Huh? Predictably, he exploded. What the hell? Why? Shouta glared at him, quickly prickling the back of his eyes. Bakugo hadn't used his yet, but he looked seconds away from exploding his desk. You knew going into the exam you were to focus on teamwork. Instead of working with Midoriya, you chose to punch him 30 seconds into the exam. Do you think that's how real heroes behave in the field? We did work together to beat All Might, Bakugo demanded. You're just mad because he's your son. Oh, believe me, I'm aware of my bias here. That's why I asked another teacher to judge your exam, and he said the same thing. You can't always pick your partners, and even if you loathe another hero, you'll have to be able to put that aside to work with them. It took you until the very end to agree to Midoriya's plan, and the two of you only pulled it off out of dumb luck. My decision stands. You'll be in the remedial classes during the summer camp. He transitioned into revealing that all those who failed will also be attending the camp. A few of them didn't look so surprised, catching on to his logical ruse game by now. Bakugo seized through the rest of his homeroom. Shouta felt no pity. It was his own fault for failing. Izuku gave him plenty of opportunities to cooperate, and Bakugo had sprung almost all of them. Even Vlad had said it was the most unprofessional show of heroics he had ever seen. In a real villain fight, their animosity would have gotten them killed. All Might could have snapped Bakugo in half several times over if he wanted. Real life doesn't have the luxury of time to work their problems out. With only 3 years before he went pro, Bakugo needed to learn how to put his personal feelings aside sooner rather than later. Shouta could only hope he'd figure it out over the summer training camp. Izuku wasn't sure if it was cruel or not to drag Hitoshi to the mall with his class. Since they were shopping for summer camp Hitoshi wasn't going on, and bonding as a class that he wasn't a part of yet. Some of Bakugo's friends gave him weird looks, and Izuku glared back at them to keep them quiet. To great effect. It wasn't like the trip was pointless for Hitoshi, anyways. He moved in with them with barely any belongings to his name, so Shouta and Hisashi had thrown some money at him and told him to buy whatever he wanted or needed. Shouta even made it a point to tell him that if he needed more comfortable pocketing for the money now, that was fine too. Izuku silently promised himself to do his best to make sure Toshi bought at least one thing he wanted. But while the class was still waiting for a few people, Hitoshi got roped into some kind of conversation with Kaminari. Todoroki and Tenya took Izuku's attention away, and he figured Hitoshi would be fine. Todoroki didn't need anything, and he only come to get out of the house, so when the class later split up to avoid overwhelming the stores, he stuck by Izuku and Uraraka's side. Hitoshi, surprisingly, went with Kaminari and his group. So, bug spray? Izuku checked with Uraraka. She nodded, and they set off for the outdoor gear. Have either of you been camping? No, fires and trees don't usually mix well, Todoroki stated. Izuku suddenly had an image of Endeavor, flaming costume and all, trying to roast marshmallows. Giggling to himself, he pictured Todoroki roasting marshmallows over Endeavor's flames. Uraraka poked him in the side and demanded to know what was so funny. Izuku shared his imaginings, and Todoroki raised a hand to hide his quick snort of laughter. Izuku beamed at him. Then a figure behind Todoroki caught his attention. He couldn't have told you why. They wore a dark hoodie with the hood up, pale hair hanging down in front of a face he could barely see. But whoever it was looked right at them, lifting their head just enough for Izuku to glimpse their face. He stopped walking. Midoriya? Uraraka asked. Todoroki turned to disappear into the crowd. Todoroki, freeze the guy in the dark hoodie. Don't let him get away. Izuku whispered, pulling his phone out. What? Why? Now! Izuku hissed, pressing call on his dad's contact. Todoroki obliged, lightly stomping his foot and shooting a stream of ice across the floor until it encased the man's legs. Uraraka, try and get people out of here. Izuku said. What's going on? She asked. Shigaraki, he said, right before Shouta picked up. The name was all his friends needed before sprinting into action. Todoroki straightened the ice around him, and Uraraka urged people to get away. Izuku? Shouta asked. Dad, Shigaraki's at the mall. Todoroki has him in ice, but it won't last long. Even as he spoke, Shigaraki reached down to decay the ice around him. Shouta swore, and Izuku heard rushed movements on the other side of the phone. Keep your distance from him. Are there any other villains? Izuku scanned them all, but didn't see any. I don't see them, but they could be hiding and waiting for a better opportunity. A door slammed on Shota's end. Don't let your guard down. I'm on my way. Where's the mall security? A few security guards were rushing over, but security guards would never be able to hold Shigaraki off. Todoroki was barely able to keep him trapped, reforming the ice over and over every time Shigaraki decayed it. The rate of decay picked up each time as Shigaraki grew angrier and angrier. They'll be on the way, but I doubt there'll be enough. I've put out the alert, and a nearby hero should be on their way to help. Shouta said. Avoid a fight as long as you can. Izuku nodded, watching Shigaraki and Todoroki closely. It was only a matter of time before Shigaraki found a way to hurt Todoroki, even from over there. And he had a phone in one hand, probably calling for backup. If its warp friend was near, that could be major trouble. Todoroki, Uraraka called. Can you trap his hands for a minute? I can try, but you'll have to move fast. Todoroki warned. Uraraka nodded, already moving a few steps closer with determination in her eyes. Even though Shigaraki knew it was coming and raised his hands above his head, Todoroki's eyes still spread over his torso to reach at his hands. Uraraka darted forward, slapping Shigaraki's chest just as he freed his hands. He laughed, and Uraraka darted back to safety. What was that supposed to do? Were you trying to make me happy or something? Make me feel all light and airy, so I won't attack? He reached down to free his feet, still frozen to the ground. Todoroki led him, which confused Shigaraki for a few seconds, until he lifted off the ground. With the height of the mall ceiling 3 stories above them and nothing for Shigaraki to reach out between the floor and said ceiling, trapped him in zero gravity was the best way to keep him contained until the authorities got there. "You little bitch!" he growled, flailing in the air. "Nice thinking, Uraraka," Izuku complimented, and then relayed what she had done to Shouta, still on the phone with him. Shigaraki, floating in the air, quickly drew attention, and it wasn't long before the rest of their class was racing towards them. Mall security blinked at the situation, but before they could even process what was happening, the heroes were already arriving, and Izuku had no doubt police would be far behind. Shigaraki growled at them. "All I wanted was a peaceful walk to clear my head, and you brats had to go and ruin it. Heroes are always ruining everything." Todoroki frowned next to Izuku. He was saying something about that before, too. "You can't take anything he says seriously." Tenya chopped his hands for emphasis. "I know, but I'm trying to understand what he wants." "What I want?" Shigaraki repeated. "I want people to realize heroes are just as much to blame for their problems as villains." He threw his arms around for emphasis, sending himself spinning through the air until Kamini Woods trapped him in a cage. Shigaraki decayed a branch, and Woods howled and retreated. A warp gate opened on the floor. "Shit!" Izuku swore, watching Kirigiri step through. His class was immediately on defensive, expecting villains to pour forth, like the USJ, and even the surrounding heroes paused to assess the newcomer. All Kirigiri did was glance up at a still-floating Shigaraki and created a warp gate for him to disappear through, and then he turned to the crowd. "My apologies for disturbing your day," he said, before stepping back through the gate he came through. The silence passed on them, like a crushing weight. Todoroki released her quirk, and promptly threw up in a potted tree. Izuku wasn't sure what her distance limit was, especially after her ball throw was infinite at the beginning of the year, but a softball was a whole lot lighter than a grown man, and that made everything different. The real chaos broke out after that. Most of the class was free to go home, but Izuku, Todoroki, and Uraraka had to go with the police for their statements, and a light scolding about using their quirks without a license. Todoroki and Izuku bristled at that. "He's a major villain. Why are we in trouble for trying to capture him?" Izuku demanded, the officer questioning him. "Young man, we have rules and laws for a reason," the officer said, exasperated. He had a reptile mutation, scales climbing up his neck, and a forked tongue flickering out every so often. Todoroki would be all over this guy with questions about his quirk if this were any other situation. He felt a special kinship with animal mutation quirks. "We didn't even hurt him, though. We just tried to keep him in one place for the heroes to get him," Izuku insisted. "And that's the only reason you're not facing serious consequences," the officer went on. Izuku wanted to scream. The fact that this scenario would be very different if he had plastered a card made him furious. "The guy tried to kill my class before. He almost killed my dad, and I'm supposed to walk away when I see him again? Not a chance. Maybe Shigaraki had gotten away today, but what if he hadn't? What if they managed to capture him? Would the police still be mad then? Or would they be singing his and his friends' praises for capturing such a dangerous criminal?" "I understand that," the officer said with a forced patience. "But you still don't have the authority to determine who needs to be arrested and who doesn't. You should have called authorities and gotten yourself into safety." "I did call a hero as soon as I could," he said. His dad had managed to beat the police there, so that had to say something. Shigaraki had been long gone at that point, and no one had been hurt, but he'd still personally checked his entire class over before he relaxed. Even now, he had somewhere around the station with Hitoshi, waiting until Izuku could finally go home. He and the officer argued for another 10 minutes before Detective Tsukachi interrupted and sent the officer out. But then Izuku's face was red from anger, and he was ready to flip the table. "I listened to some of that," Tsukachi told him. "And I know it's not fair to be scolded for your actions so heroically, but we have at least to pretend to uphold the law here, especially when technically you and your friends struck first. You can't even claim self-defense." "Sorry, if I don't want to wait for someone to get hurt first." Izuku snapped. Tsukachi raised his hands in surrender. "I know. I don't blame you for rushing to act. In the situation, you did the best you could. No one was hurt, there was no property damage, and you had heroes there within minutes. You kids did good. And once you're properly licensed, you'll be great heroes. The compliment made Izuku feel a little bit better. Just keep yourself out of trouble before then, okay? No more unauthorized quirk use. I'll do my best. Was the most Izuku would promise, but it was enough for Tsukachi to finally let him go. Everyone else was already waiting for him. Todoroki had fought back with his officer, and still seemed pretty out of it too. You didn't even use your quirk. Why were you in trouble? Todoroki asked. I'm the one who told Todoroki to use his. It wasn't fair for him to get all the blame, Izuku said. Shaking his head, Shouta wrapped him in a hug. Can't I even let you go to the mall without having to worry about you? Yeah, come on. I didn't even get any of my stuff for our room because of you. Hitoshi joked. Todoroki and Uraka seized their sentence with two exclamations of, come again? Izuku pulled out of Shota's embrace. Oh, yeah, Dad adopted Hitoshi. We're brothers now. Uraka lightly punched his arm. You should have said something. Congrats, Hitoshi. Yeah, congrats. Todoroki echoed. Hitoshi's ears reddened, and he looked to the side, shoving his hands in his pockets. Thanks. Alright, it's getting late, Shouta said. Do you two have rides home? They both did. Fuyumi and Uraraka's parents were all waiting outside together, watching a shaky video someone took with their phone of what had happened at the mall. Of course, someone had filmed the whole thing. At least Izuku was barely noticeable in the background. His friends were clearly front and center, but unless anyone knew him, they probably weren't watching him too much. Izuku caught Todoroki's arm before he left. If Endeavor gives you a hard time, just come over to our place, okay? Izuku told him. Todoroki nodded. Thanks. He went to join Fuyumi. Finally, Izuku was able to go home after that. He put up with Hisashi's fussing and pretending not to notice Shouta watching him so carefully. It was one of those nights where Hitoshi went to bed at the same time as Izuku, and they laid there in the dark for a while. You know, Izuku stated softly, curling up in his blankets. It's a shame you weren't there when I spotted him. With your quirk, you could have frozen Shigaraki in place until the police got there. Then the school would have to let you transfer for catching the leader of the League of Villains. Hitoshi snorted. Or I'll just be in trouble for illegal quirk use like you. Nah, let's say we're just talking and keeping Shigaraki distracted. There'd be no proof that you used your quirk. You'd lie to the police for me? Hitoshi asked, humor colored in his voice. Sure, I'd probably tell Dad, though. Hitoshi laughed. That's fair. He rolled over, making the bed shake. You really think I could have helped capture Shigaraki today? Of course, Izuku said. You captured a lot of villains like that one day, and you'll be an amazing hero. He couldn't see Hitoshi's face, but he imagined the soft smile his brother usually got when someone said that to him. He still had a hard time believing that anyone supported him sincerely, so Izuku tried his best to tell him as often as he could. Sashi said he'll help you with your quirk while Dad and I are gone, so you'll basically have your own stay-at-home summer camp, Izuku said. Yeah, Hitoshi said. I'll be working my butt off, so you better do the same. Izuku laughed. Promise. Like his dad would let him get away with anything less. The smile Shouta wore when planning this camp was not his friendliest smile. Izuku had come to associate it with his dad's petty side, the one he found completely legal ways to get back at his students for all the headaches they caused him. Izuku was curious to see what his dad had planned, but he also knew he was likely going to suffer for the next 2 weeks. It didn't stop him from looking forward to it. Even the incident at the mall earlier and his argument with the police didn't dampen his mood. He fell asleep with a smile on his face. Wow, I actually can't believe I finished that in time. Normally that doesn't happen. Normally it takes forever. What was that? Why did it not take forever? Anyways, the mom thingy did not go as expected. For a second I thought they were gonna capture him. I wonder, is the training camps shit gonna happen still? Or are they gonna back out because of what happened? So next one is called Flashback Thursday Milestone. Just a few big firsts of Izuku living with Shouta. Oh, so is this just like a little flashback? Is this not... Are we not continuing? Hold on. Guys? What? Hello? 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 Fellow humans? Fellow humans? Are we not continuing with thy story? Is this not what is gonna happen? Okay. I mean, weird, but okay. Also, I have a feeling that the next one is also gonna be just 2 chapters, or 2 episodes. I think I'm gonna start doing 2 episodes each chapter, which I mean is gonna be super cool. I mean, we're gonna finish this shit really quick if it's like that. Back to this. Well, I mean, I guess it used to be like really long. I guess chapter 1 was longer than these chapters. These chapters have been a little smaller. But I cannot wait to see this all roll out and see it all fully played out. I don't have any more notes, so as always, my raindrops, make sure to eat, sleep, drink water, take your meds. Have a wonderful day or night. Link to my Discord server and socials are down in the description. Subscribe to see more of my content, and thank you so much for watching.